Normally, we try to keep these videos a bit more evergreen, but this week there's been a hot topic in comics that we commented on our main show, and it revolves around a retailer who made some comments that people felt were incendiary about the industry, and we want to tackle. We tackled a lot on the main show, but we want to tackle a specific point that he made about the state of the quality of comics and creators in comics. And this is something that's come up a lot, right? Mark Miller said that creators needed to go back. The top tier creators need to go back to Marvel and DC to show the young whippersnappers how it's done and, make some great comics again and help retailers and bolster the industry. So my question is, with the idea that, comics aren't as good as they used to, not that I'm saying that I feel that way, but that's the idea that comics aren't as good as they used to be, and that the writing isn't as good as it used to be, and that we need these top tier creators from a bygone era to do the great work that they've done to bring us back. Do you think that comics, particularly the big two, have a creator problem? Do they have a talent problem? Are there not enough good creators in the pool for them to pull from and make these stories great?
I think and just reflecting on Pal's polls, um, I mean, the majority of the books that we read are good to great, um, for a given week. The week will vary, but I think for the most part, um, collectively on the show, but I think also individually, I feel like 9 times out of 10, I like about 4 of the 5 books, and that's a pretty good number. I can only imagine if you extrapolate that to the larger stuff that I like, the larger pool of books I'll get in a given week. I'm also going to hit that number or something close to it. So a 90 to 80% is, in my opinion, uh, good. It shows that we're the what's out there with the writers that we have. I'm thinking of a Ewing. I'm thinking of a Tom King. I'm thinking of, in my opinion, Cy Spurrier. Like, there's stuff out there that creators are doing and doing well. Um, and I'm enjoying all of those things. So I don't believe that there's a creator issue. I think it'll fluctuate, but I think comics, the quality of a book during a run, that's what happens. It ebbs and flows.
I have issues with this question because a, what is good? Honestly, what's good for me is not necessarily good for you. It's not necessarily good for Sean. It's not necessarily good for Glenn O'Leary. What was his name?
Yeah.
O'Malley. But so I think that it's too subjective to consider something good. I think there are times when you can be like, yes, the craft of this isn't great. It's missing panels or pacing is bad. I think that's valid. But I don't think we see that often in the big two. I think it's more of a marketing issue. When I think of what are like top tier creators, I think of the thing that jumps to mind is Marvel's Architects, where Marvel pretty much marketed their top tier creators and told you who their top tier creators were. It's Hickman, it's Bendis, it's Brubaker, and I think we still have people that are at that level now, but it's not explicitly stated they're those people. You know what I mean? Like, I think if we were to have an architects now, Al Ewing would be up there.
Mm.
I think he's not really big too, but Daniel Warren Johnson, another big creator like that.
Stick to the big two because I want to
Yeah,
see where you're going to take that. Because okay, you got Al Ewing. Who else?
Hickman currently, but I think this is also like wrestling term, but they're not pushing those people. You know what I mean? Like, I think based on content, like Kelly Thompson could be one of them. If it was told to us, I don't think Marvel or DC cares about making names for their creators anymore because it's about they're selling characters. Because when they sold creators previously, they all left. So there's no reason for them to do that anymore. And because of that, we don't see the optics of big creators in the big two anymore.
I think you're right about that, but I also think we just inherently know who the big creators are, and like maybe not everyone knows, but like for the sake of this conversation, we
Sure,
know.
sure.
Yeah.
And if you had to continue that list, past Al Ewing and Jonathan Hickman, where are you really going? That's why I'm asking this question, because I don't know that I think that like the quality of comics is markedly different than it was when I was coming up necessarily. But I do think that when you're talking about star power in comics, um, in the sense of these are the creators who are really great, who are doing, phenomenal work at the big two. Um, I do think that it's not that long of a list.
But I think you can make, claims for Chip. You can make claims for PKJ. I think some people even say like Jed McKay is doing great stuff at Marvel. Maybe not his Avenger stuff, but his Moon Knight and Doctor Strange is phenomenal. Black Cat stuff, real great. And I think if they would mark like, oh, Jed McKay's Black Cat Mary Jane continues, and they market it as the creator's book, we would have a clearer idea of who would be considered a top creator.
But what does it matter if you know who's considered that if we just don't believe it? Like, I don't believe that. I don't believe that Jed McKay is that.
You know, that caliber.
Yeah, personally, I don't. And it's subjective, but we can.
Sure.
I mean, I was going to say we can see what's selling or what's not. We sort of can't, but we know we have a general idea of whose books tend to do well and whose don't, and we can see based on the conversations what's connecting and not. I don't know if I would put a lot of people in that category.
If you look at the top sellers, and Chip would be considered that, Dan Slott would be considered that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I guess to that end, right, it's also a matter of I think the point there being we don't have maybe as many standout creators where previously we had whole swaths of and this is mostly from the Marvel stuff that you guys will say, but when Remender was on the books, Brubaker was on, when you had can't even think of but just like a
Fraction.
Fraction
On.
yeah, and all of these people have that cultural cachet. They're putting out good books, and maybe a few more of them were exceptional as opposed to good or great. And that might be some of what drives that conversation is we don't have enough of those people to turn to say, well, look at that sort of North Star for the era that we're writing in. And I think that maybe colors some of the narrative.
I also think in terms of incentive for creators, it's not there. Why do my best work at a company that I will get no rights for that character? I might get a cool little check and a thank you at the end credits of a movie that nobody's reading. They're just talking through to see the end credit scene. When I could do that at Image, and then it could be optioned for a TV show. Like Stray Dogs right now is supposedly a key issue at Image because that's going to be rumored to be optioned for a TV show.
It's real good.
It's good, yeah, and that's where you do your work because it sucks, but that's where your money is going to be. Like the people that did their best work at Marvel, and who's the guy who created Rocket Raccoon? It's an issue that I forget his name, but he died recently, poor. Even though his character that he created is making millions for the company. So that incentive to be a top creator at the big two isn't there.
I think the incentive to create a worthwhile story that involves your own building of characters and building of world and like putting I don't even want to say hard work, but like
it's hard work
because it's all hard work. Like I'm not gonna denigrate that fact,
Right.
but I think you're willing to take less risks, and if you're willing to take less risks, then you're probably less likely to come across things that maybe push the bounds of both comics and the character that you're writing for.
Look at Romby, one of those people that I think was on his way to top star at a company. Does incredible work with Swamp Thing and Justice League Dark, and as soon as his name gets known, exclusive with an independent, where he has more rights.
He's not exclusive though.
Well, the way it was marketed that way was like, all right, he's going to be doing all of his work here and stuff, and then we find out that like, all right, maybe it's not that is clear cut, but that seems to be the trajectory for creators now, and I think the big two know that. So why invest in making top creators when it's top characters?
My opinion is that top creators make themselves. in the sense that, once you end up in the pool of creators who are working for the big two, if your work is great, if your work is really strong, I think it tends to rise to the top. I personally can't think of, and I'm sure maybe someone else can, but I can't think of creators who I'm like, wow, that person was such an amazing talent. They did phenomenal work. I can't believe that they can't get work in the big two.
Like can't get work or don't want to get work.
Right? Cannot.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, I think in comics, the cream rises to the top. And I don't think that Marvel or DC have any type of incentive to keep anybody down. But I do agree that they don't necessarily have any incentive to promote their creators in a way of like, this is the guy to follow or this is the person to follow, because they're going to follow that person right out the door of the big two.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a problem. And when we look at the pool that exists of creators outside of the big two, all the talent is phenomenal. I mean, like, there's so much great work. And I'm not saying there's not great work in the big two. Of course there is. But we can't get the Rick Remender Iron Man story. That's never going to happen. We're not getting it. We're not going to get the Jeff Johns, X-Men. That's not happening. These creators are no longer in the pool for the big two. And that diminishes not only the kinds of stories that we can read, because there are people who just simply can't work there, but also we're losing out on some of the greatest creators that exist in comics.
And God, I hate to agree with Mark Millar here for a second, but without that in the big two, I think it's that raise all ships.
Yeah, rising
Analogy.
tide raises all
Yeah,
boats.
that one. I don't think of raising ships. Just think of Godzilla. I'm Godzilla brain right now. But if we have big two creators that are making big two comics worthwhile, it could raise the other books because more people are into comics at that point.
Of
But
course.
Yeah.
There's no incentive that Marvel or DC is giving creators to do that.
I think that distinction that you made, Sean, of if you get a individual into let's say you follow an Al Ewing, right? And then you really bolster that individual as the individual separate from the IP, then I think you're right. Then you probably run the risk of losing people to the individual as opposed to falling in love with or sticking around for the Hulk, because the next person's going to come on, who knows what they're going to do on. I really like the stories that these guys were telling. Now that I know, maybe the next thing that they do that's not Marvel or DC is going to be good. And it's a way of how do you incentivize a comic book writer to build the IP specific to their and curtail it to their storytelling so that it's so individualized that it's like the only way you can get it is if you had gotten Al Ewing's Hulk. There is no alternative.
I think that's the case just because of the nature of the fact that the creator had the ability, in that case, Al Ewing had the ability to tell a story over 50 issues, right? And very much made that his own thing. But we see in the case of Al, like, that didn't translate into some major indie work. He did We Only Find Them When They're Dead. He tried that out. I thought it was phenomenal, but unfortunately it didn't last that long.
Yeah.
And so, is that because there was no link between Immortal Hulk and We Only Find Them? Because that's what Dirk had said when he did the show the other week. He talked about how, if your big two work doesn't resemble what you're doing on the indie scene, then people aren't going to connect you with that. That's why, in Dirk's opinion, Robert Kirkman popped with The Walking Dead, because he had done Marvel Zombies and people loved it. And they're like, wow, more zombies by this guy? I'm in.
There's a reason why Deadpool's daddy issues on Uncanny X-Force had led to Rick Remender's daddy issue universe of books. Thematically,
Right.
there's ties.
If you read Rick's Marvel work and you read his indie work, yeah, it's not the same characters, but it's very much the same kind of story. And it's consistent. I followed him over because I loved what he was doing, and he kept doing it, even if it wasn't with the same characters.
And it's funny because I think Hickman and Ewing are similar in that regard, because I think those are the two ones that are like at Marvel right now that have a big name. But their big brand is high sci-fi. And when it leaves the big two, people get a little lost.
Yeah, because it's harder to determine what is the emotional core,
Yep.
what is the thing that I'm attaching myself to with these stories.
Yep.
I attach myself to the themes of what Rick Remender talks about, not the characters that he was using to talk about them. And so it doesn't matter where he works, I'm going to get the kind of story that I need from him. It's so specific to him. And you know, I hate to make a reference that some of us might not get, but just real quick, the same logic applies in wrestling. The same logic applies. WWE stopped promoting individual stars because they lost so many, and people went to Hollywood and they went to do this or that. It really hurt them, and so they promote the brand. And it's only now that we're really seeing that start to shift and change. But for many years, well over a decade, that's what it was like. And Marvel's doing the same thing.
That's actually a really good analogy. Yeah.
How do you make? 'Cause I feel like right now a position at the big two in writing a title character doesn't have the same level of wow to it. In the sense that there are some creators who more openly now and more often now will say, actually, rather than give me this top tier book and this character, I'm probably just gonna stick with the stuff that I'm doing. I prefer those things. Like how do you make that a desirable position so that you can focus on, for Marvel's sake, the IP?
Money.
Cash money.
Yeah.
Mm.
Behind the, we're not naming names, but every time we talk to creators, Heather Antos talked about it live on the show. She was getting paid what, 40 grand living in New York to edit the Star Wars line of books, which is one of the highest selling lines of comics at the time.
Yeah.
What's the incentive? I can't live on that. You know what I can live on? Something that I have full control over, and then I can then market myself and get more money from that.
Mm.
And, you know, to that point, you know, just from a financial standpoint, you could have a book, you know, you could work on Spider-Man and it could sell 100,000 copies, but you don't really directly benefit from the fact that it sold 100K. So if your little indie book sells 20K, well, I mean, that's not going to happen. But like, let's say, for example, it sells 20K, that's a fraction of what your Spider-Man work sold for, but you're reaping so much more of the benefit that financially it makes more sense for you to work for yourself.
Much less slices of pie there.
Absolutely. So I think ultimately all of this comes down to finances. If Marvel and DC were offering the same kinds of contracts and page rates that they were offering in the early 2000s and late 2000s, then I'm pretty sure that a lot of the creators who stood on ceremony about wanting to tell the kinds of stories that they want to tell would still work for the big two. And I'm not saying that to make fun of them or shit on them. I'm saying that because money talks. And if these creators were being compensated properly, they'd have a lot more reason to stick around. But if you're not going to get paid right anyway, and you don't own these characters anyway, and someone is telling you the kinds of things you can do and not do in your stories anyway, then why not go work for yourself?
I bet you if Marvel would offer health insurance, you'd get top tier creators on. Like, as simple as that.
That alone.
Yeah.
That alone.
Get maybe a nice little residual check if they pop up in an MCU movie or something.
I think literally if it's just health insurance, that's enough stability to get people. I'm not even joking. Health insurance for a creative is gold.
Dental.
Yeah.
So as we close out, to wrap up to answer the question, do the big two have a talent problem? My answer is sort of. And I know that's not, that's not a full commitment. But the reason why I say that is because there are great books coming out from both companies. Marvel and DC have great books. But in my opinion, there does feel like there's just not as much boldness in the storytelling, which could be due to mandates. I certainly believe it at Marvel. And I don't feel like there's as much exciting happening things that I have to see and I cannot look away from. I feel like a lot of that stuff is happening outside the big two. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think it's the creators and their freedom and their passion.
I think there's a talent issue. I don't think there's a creator issue. Does that make sense?
Elaborate.
In the sense that I think talent incentives to become talent, capital T talent, are not there. It's not being given to them by the companies that own it. Whereas I think there's plenty of creators that can become that if that option was there.
Yeah, here with that.
And I think what Sean's saying is that, you're right, really liking the Spider-Man run currently
Love it.
because it's bold. You want
Right.
more cucking in comics. I think that's.
More Chad Paul.
I'm gonna say a hard no to that, but I like it. I mean, I love the run so much just because it feels like Spider-Man. I don't even know that. I mean, most people would probably say it's not bold. Most people would say, "Oh, this is exactly like what Cale says. This is exactly what Spider-Man stories always are," and I'm tired of the same old thing. I'm not. I'm not, and I think that it's great. And it is what it is if people disagree. The point ultimately is, in my mind, that comics will always exist. The big two are going to stick around, but they have to start making this financially viable enough so that creators don't want to leave, or so that they can continue to do what they want to do elsewhere and make great money making great comics for the big two. Why not? Why not? But that's our take. What's yours? Sound off in the comments. Let us know what you think about what we've said here. And let us know what you think about what's going on in the world of comics. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed what we just did. Like the video, share with your friends, all that jazz. You know how to YouTube by now. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care.